Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow.
Let me give you an update. We've got, you've seen it all over in the news this weekend and even this morning, and that is the situation with Pastor Andrew Brunson. I have had numerous conversations with the president, with the vice president's staff as well, and our government affairs team has been speaking with the Secretary of State's office. And here's the status as it is as of this morning. There are bilateral negotiations going on right now to secure his ultimate return to the United States. And I want to distinguish between release and return. He has been released from jail to home custody, which means he is at his apartment with his family in Turkey. There's security out front to make sure that everything stays safe, but he's not yet been returned home to the United States. So a win in this case, while I'm very pleased that the Turkish authorities allowed him to return to his home, we want to see him return to his country, and that is the United States of America. So what we're working on right now and what the State Department's working on right now, the Vice President's office, and the President of the United States himself, I mean, we talked over the weekend about Brunson, Pastor Brunson, is the release and return. In other words, release from Turkish custody, even though he's at home, it's still technically custody, returned to the United States. Now, whether they try him in absentia or something like that, that's different. And that's not our issue. Our issue is getting him home back to the United States of America. Progress has been made, but these are complex bilateral negotiations going on right now. The president's talked about sanctions being implemented if he's not released. The president's serious about that. Turkish authorities don't want that. I'm sure they don't want that. We need to make sure that everyone understands that Turkey's made a step, but there needs to be a lot more to get this successfully resolved. It's very important that Turkey and the United States maintain relations because of NATO and the fact that they play a strategic role in the region. So that's important. So you've got to look beyond simply the Andrew Brunson case. But it's important to understand that as we're negotiating right now, and as our United States government's negotiating, I was on phone calls all weekend on this at the highest levels of government and government affairs individuals. Stan and I spoke, Cece and I spoke, our team spoke with Jordan a lot over the weekend on this, spoke to the president. The goal here is securing his return to the United States.
That's right. I mean, ultimately, you celebrate, in these kind of cases, in these situations, you celebrate each step, each small victory along the way. Things get better. That's a positive a moment, and I think we've done that to this point. Now, refocusing, you kind of get past the shock of that first, okay, you got let out of prison, gets into the home custody. Now refocusing the efforts, which happened immediately. And we were kind of telling you about this last week, but we weren't focused on that last week because we were getting you up to speed on what had just happened in Turkey. But now we're focused on the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is his return home to the United States of America, not to home confinement in his home in Turkey, but to the USA out. And that happens when he is flown out of Turkish airspace, basically. And so that is when the ultimate goal has been met, and that is where the work now is focused.
Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, was on the phone this weekend with the foreign minister from Turkey. We'll talk about that when we come back from the break, and we'll get your calls and comments. All right, we've got a lot more ahead. We've got a petition up at aclj.org for the release and return home of Pastor Andrew Brunson. He's in home confinement now. We want to see him return to the United States. You can sign that at aclj.org. Also, very important, we're in a matching challenge campaign. Your support of the ACLJ makes a huge difference. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. That's aclj.org.
It is a critical time for our nation, and the American Center for Law and Justice is on the front lines, defending life and liberty, engaging the issues that matter most to you and your family. Whether it's working to protect Americans from the dangers of radical Islam and the persecution of Christians, to defending life at the U.S. Supreme Court, to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms, we could not do this work without you, without your support. And now your support can really make a tremendous difference. For a limited time, you can participate in the ACLJ Matching Challenge. If you make a gift now, it will be doubled. $25 becomes $50. A $100 gift becomes $200. Please stand with the ACLJ right now and call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or go online at aclj.org. Thank you for your support.
Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, has spoken to his Turkish counterpart about the pastor's detention on these charges that they've drummed up. Christianization, of course, is the focus. He is at home confinement right now. So he's been released from prison, but he's in home confinement, which does not mean he's been released. So in other words, he's not free to return to the United States. He's really not free to leave the apartment unless under very specific guidelines from the Turkish authorities. CC Howells, a senior counsel with the ACLJ. She's been very involved in this case, leading the ongoing negotiations for the family. But she also spoke to the Brunson family. So let's get an update. As to, obviously, it was last week when we got word that Brunson was removed from the jail to home confinement. That was a very positive first step.
Right. It's not the step that we want. He needs to be on U.S. soil, but it is a positive step. It's a positive step for Pastor Brunson just physically, emotionally, in all ways to be out of prison.
So when you look at the situation, Than, right now, let's go to the Capitol Hill side of this. You got the Defense Authorization Act. What's the status? What language did or did not stay in?
Well, as you know, Jay, this has been one of the big battles on the legislative side of things. The House and the Senate trying to arm the president with the leverage that he needs to negotiate with Turkey on not only Andrew Brunson, but also defense issues, Jay. Last week, the House of Representatives passed language that we're very happy with. Section 1278 mentions Pastor Brunson specifically. Section 1282 provides the president with some authority to withhold certain arms to Turkey if they do not improve relationships. That bill, Jay, is going to be voted on in the United States Senate this week. It looks like Thursday, Jay, it will probably be the last issue they deal with before leaving for their 1 week recess. So what it does is essentially gives the president the opportunity to sign into law an additional tool in his toolbox as he negotiates for release. And Jay, I would say this, all of it falls under one theme: giving the president of the United States as many diplomatic options as he can to yield a positive result for Pastor Andrew Brunson. We've said it from the beginning. That's how we get to a positive solution here. A diplomatic ends. He's the chief diplomat here. The United States House and Senate, in a bipartisan basis, is standing behind him and giving him the tools he needs to accomplish that job.
It's very important to understand, and the reason we're spending time on this is obviously it's been on the news all morning. The relationship between the United States and Turkey, Jordan, very critical, not just NATO, but also location.
That's right. We have a major military base that we share with Turkey there. We talked about this on Thursday with members of military. We asked them to call in those who had actually served at that base to talk about the importance. Why don't you just break off the relationship? Why don't you just issue the sanctions on day one? Why do you kind of hang that out there and then still negotiate? And of course, Turkey is a member of NATO, but I let those former military who had served at Interling Air Force Base explain it to people, so it wasn't just my words. And what all of them said was, it is the most important base we have in that region. It's a 30-minute by jet, 30 minutes to the Middle East, but the protection of not being right in the middle of the kind of the hot spots. It gives us really a leg up on the rest of the world superpowers who are even closer to the region but don't have bases like that operational. We have seen a shift in the U.S. military to other locations inside the Middle East. Obviously, we have a large base about the same size in Qatar, but that is still not a NATO ally, and at any moment, it's just a different. The Turkish base is long-standing, about 10,000 U.S. troops, and it's not something you just give up. You fight for that diplomatically, even in the case of these strongmen type leaders like Erdogan in this bad situation with Andrew Brunson. You do not give up your base. What you do is things like the NDAA and put 90 days in. the possibility of sanctions, but the hope that you never have to issue them. Tough talk sometimes, because that's what these leaders understand. I mean, listen to Erdogan in any of his speeches. That's how he talks. That's what he responds to. And so, but we have to understand that this relationship with Turkey, though very strained, and at the most strained in U.S. history, not because of President Trump, by the way. This is just how things have been moving in Turkey. They've made that decision. The president of Turkey, Erdogan, and his government, and the people who have elected him. So the Turkish people have made that decision. That ultimately you do everything possible to keep that relationship, and the NATO allies as well do not want to see Turkey leave NATO. They don't want to see that base closed down, even though it was tough, remember, during the battle against ISIS to get jets from taking off from it. We had jets there, and they weren't letting them take off to fly sorties in. So ultimately, though, that was worked out. So it's a very important situation.
So the White House press secretary just moments ago issued a statement on the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. It closes with this, quote, it also welcomes language recognize the ongoing and wrongful detainment of Andrew Brunson and Sekulow, who is another American that is being held in Turkey. So the fact that that's in the language, and that's good news for the pastor's family too. They need to understand. So you should probably contact them after the broadcast and let them know that that's the language he's actually in. I mean, it's pretty historic that you have an individual named in the in the actual language, the law
of the Defense Authorization Act.
Yeah, I think it's a huge deal that Pastor Brunson's name is in a legislative bill. So, you know, I think that the U.S. is making it very clear that Pastor Brunson's release is top priority.
Yeah, I mean, his name, it says Andrew Brunson. Do we have the exact language?
I do.
What does it say? This is pretty historic.
Section 1278 says it is the sense of Congress that the government of the Republic of Turkey continues to unlawfully and wrongfully detain United States citizens, including Andrew Brunson and Sekulow and staff of the United States missions in the Republic of Turkey. And Jay, then there are several pages of other findings, and ultimately it concludes with the teeth that we've talked about, that if there's not a positive resolution to these situations, the United States Congress is going to stand behind President Trump and issue penalties for Turkey. Again, President Trump has the first crack at this with sanctions, but the United States Congress is going to follow closely behind him.
Andrew Brunson should be released. It's going to get very expensive for Turkey to keep him, and it's not. We just need to get this matter resolved to improve diplomatic relations between the United States and Turkey. This is Americans being held unlawfully, but again, this is where at least he's home. That's number one, and number two, the fact that our team has been able to get the language of the legislation to include Andrew Brunson's name is pretty historic. I mean, very historic. And that's, again, this is why you've got your global assets of the American Center for Law and Justice and our affiliates overseas.
And also news out there that may not be totally accurate to help people through that, because it's getting so much attention now. And Lance in New Jersey, Online One, has a question about some of the news being reported on the negotiations going on, even with other countries. Lance, welcome to Sekulow Live. You're on the air.
Hi, Lance.
Yeah, how you doing, Jay?
Good.
Is there any truth that Erdogan requested a Turkish woman detained in Israel be released in return for Pastor Brunson, and that once she was released, that Erdogan reneged on his promise by not fully releasing Pastor Brunson? And wouldn't it show that they're not a reliable partner in this?
Yeah, so here's the thing. That there was a Turkish woman who had some Hamas ties, was being held by the Israelis, and she was released. It was not tied into the Pastor Brunson situation. That's part of what's called confidence building measures in diplomatic speak. That's what it's called. But it was not a direct tie. It wasn't you do this, we do that. This is a direct call for the release of an American that's unlawfully detained. And as we're reporting now, other Americans that have been unlawfully detained. So, but yes, the Israelis released this individual. This happens all the time. And this is not an unusual situation, by the way. This happens all the time in these kind of negotiations. This is what happens here. In this particular case was she was released back to Turkey, and then it was not a simultaneous transfer with Brunson. And I think the expectation, I know, the expectation is that Brunson is returned to the United States. And the pressure that's on Turkey really doesn't stop until he is returned.
That's right, Jay, and there's a whole range of leverage options available to the United States. You've heard the president talk about the sanction one. I think that's the biggest club, so to speak, over Turkey. You've also got the delivery of F-35s that the Congress has now delayed for 90 days. Jay, there's also a range of other things. You could bar Turkish diplomats from entering the United States for a period of time. You could also restrict international lending. All of these things are on the table. And again, I would stress, Jay, they're things that the United States does not want to do. We want to have a positive relationship with the Republic of Turkey, but ultimately, the president has been very clear on this. This is up to President Erdogan. We will have a close relationship, or Pastor Brunson will be returned, or these measures will proceed. He'll start with the sanctions, but Jay, that whole range of options is on the table, and I think the Congress stands ready to stand behind the president on implementing them.
I think that's exactly correct. I know that for a fact. So here's what I also know. There are high-level negotiations going on right now to secure the release of Pastor Brunson. That is happening. Those conversations are ongoing right now. Now, will it culminate in a release this week? I'm hoping and praying that's the case. But the family understands, CC, that we literally have a large team of ACLJ lawyers, government affairs professionals on this, and the government is fully engaged.
Yeah, and we spent all last week at the Ministerial to Advance International Religious Freedom. Their daughter, Jacqueline Fernari, was there and, got to speak at that ministerial. We had very many high-level meetings, Ambassador Brownback, Deputy Secretary Sullivan, Ambassador Kozak, Nikki Haley. So Jacqueline was able to speak at a congressional meeting. So, we have been engaged thoroughly and in D.C.
We've got a petition up at aclj.org for the release and return home of Pastor Andrew Brunson. He's in home confinement now. We want to see him return to the United States. You can sign that at aclj.org. Also, very important, we're in a matching challenge campaign. Your support of the ACLJ makes a huge difference. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. That's aclj.org.
It is a critical time for our nation, and the American Center for Law and Justice is on the front lines, defending life and liberty, engaging the issues that matter most to you and your family. Whether it's working to protect Americans from the dangers of radical Islam and the persecution of Christians, to defending life at the U.S. Supreme Court, to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms, we could not do this work without you, without your support. And now your support can really make a tremendous difference. For a limited time, you can participate in the ACLJ Matching Challenge. If you make a gift now, it will be doubled. $25 becomes $50. A $100 gift becomes $200. Please stand with the ACLJ right now and call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or go online at aclj.org. Thank you for your support.
Andrew Brunson still at home confinement. This is a key week. We're trying to get him returned to the United States. High-level meetings going on. That has put in place a situation where you have now a series of meetings that'll take place. Again, the goal is clear. Get Brunson returned, and some of the other Americans that are being held, all the Americans being held, returned to the United States. Now, Wes Smith is our senior military analyst for the American Center for Law and Justice. He has been following the National Defense Authorization Act carefully. One of the things we pointed out, Wes, very unusual to have a piece of legislation that names your client.
I don't think it's ever happened in the history of defense appropriation bills that an individual citizen is named as a condition, not only in the military spending, but also as it relates to one of our chief allies, which is Turkey.
I mean, pretty unheard of.
Yeah, absolutely. And it couldn't be more clear as well. Jay, as you know, this was one of the things that we had to work on over the last few weeks. There was a temptation at every stage of the process on the part of the Congress to pull that specific reference to Pastor Brunson out. Of course, we advocated for it remaining in. And again, Jay, I'll just read you the sentence that references him. It says, "It is the sense of Congress that the government of the Republic of Turkey continues to unlawfully and wrongfully detain United States citizen, including Andrew Brunson." And then a couple sections later, Jay, the specific language that delays the delivery of the F-35s for 90 days. And again, I will tell you this. At the end of that 90 days, that could go hard in either direction. If Pastor Brunson is home, then that security alliance with Turkey can proceed and the planes can release. If he's not home, Jay, there's nothing saying the Congress can't act again.
Wes?
Not only that, if you read the appropriations language that came out of the compromise committee, this past week, they mentioned not only the F-35s, they are going to assess all the other weapons platforms that we sell to Turkey, to include Black Hawk helicopters, F-16 Falcon, fighter jets, CH-47 Chinooks, the Patriot defense missile system. All of those things, Congress is willing to put all of those into play based on Turkey's behavior. And they get most of their weapons and their weapons platforms from the United States.
So, except for one, that key, that Russian defense system.
Yes.
I mean, that has upset the United States on a different level, with Pastor Brunson.
Think about why.
I mean, if you give an F-35 and you get the Russian missile defense system, what are you giving Russia? Exactly the next technology to figure out how to use that missile defense system to take out the most sophisticated fighter jet ever created.
Yeah.
And Turkey decided we're going to go buy this from Russia and have this installed. And that's not yet operational. I think that's, again, it's all a bargaining, right? So Turkey strategically makes a move like that, doesn't actually turn it on. The system's not fully operational. They haven't gotten their F-35s yet. We're not banning them from it, but we're saying you're not getting it right away. I mean, it's all chess pieces.
So on Face the Nation, Senator Shaheen, who's been a Democrat from New Hampshire, tireless advocate for Pastor Brunson's release. She was on Face the Nation. Take a listen.
Should the president go ahead with sanctions on Turkey, which he called for this week?
Turkey is an important ally of the United States. They're an important NATO ally. But we've seen some behavior by Turkey that is not consistent with what we expect from our allies.
That sounds like a yes.
Again, on that trip to, well, I think we need to see them release the Americans that they're holding on trumped-up charges. We had some positive news this week with Pastor Brunson going from prison to house arrest. But they're holding other Americans.
Yes.
And we need to send a consistent message.
So for the relationship between Turkey and the United States to move forward, this situation with Brunson and the other Americans has to be resolved. There is no question. All right, let's go ahead and take another phone call. We're taking your calls and comments.
All right, let's go right to the phones. John in Wyoming on line 2. John, welcome to Jay Sekulow Live.
Hey, John.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Good.
Hey, I agree with you guys. I'd like to see Pastor Brunson come home today. Are there other prisoners or anything over there that we're fighting for too, or is he not the only one?
He is not. He is not the only one. He's the only one we represent. But as Americans concerned about other Americans, we are concerned about those that are being held. Were there 3 other Americans being held, Cece?
Yes, and we can't know the exact number because they have to sign waivers. But Pastor Brunson is our client. They hired our firm to represent them back in October of 2016. So obviously we represent him legally. He's our client, but he represents the issue. You keep seeing this. It's the issue that Turkey thinks they can hold Americans hostage and they cannot. And Pastor Brunson has really become the kind of poster child for that, is you cannot hold innocent American citizens hostage as a NATO ally.
Yeah, what Cece was talking about with this disclosures and waivers, the families have to disclose on waivers before you can talk about it. We can talk about Brunson because the Brunson family is represented by the American Center for Law and Justice. So they're our client, the family and Andrew Brunson. I talked to Andrew right after he was released. Cece did it as well multiple times now. We had an interesting question come in, and that is, are any other NATO allies putting pressure on Turkey for Brunson's release? We know Britain did a little bit. Dan, what else do we know?
Well, we also know that 100 members of the European Parliament have reached out on his behalf, Jay. We have advocated with every single NATO country, and I'll be honest with you, I think we need to hear more volume from them because this NATO alliance with Turkey is important not just for the United States, but maybe disproportionately so for their security. So, Jay, I think they are passively in the correct place, but I would tell you just honestly, I think those other members of NATO, they have probably as much or more reason to speak out aggressively than does the United States. We don't need Turkey as bad badly as some of those other countries do. We need them, Jay, but not as badly as they do. They should be engaging on this.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I do believe that when it comes down ultimately, though, it's an American citizen.
Yep.
We've seen this before, and though, if this was a matter where we're talking about the human rights inside Turkey, I think you'd see more international right away. But because this is an American and we are the most powerful country in the world, and our commander-in-chief is the most powerful leader in the world, the rest of the world says, yes, we'll sign a letter. We will condemn these kind of actions. But the U.S. must take the lead because we're not going to stand ever in the way of the United States or complicate things for the United States. So will other countries help if the president asked them to? Of course they would. And I think that can be happening behind the scenes as well. But are they going to take the lead? No, it's up to the United States of America, groups like the ACLJ, the American Center for Law and Justice, and the United States of America, because this is a U.S. citizen, it's a U.S. pastor. He's not one of those complicated situations either where he's a dual citizen. He's there a long time, 23 years, but is an American citizen, and it's up to his country to see to his release.
But the good news here is that he's been returned home, Cece. I mean, he's at least in his home in Turkey, which has been his home for 23 years. We're not done until he is in international airspace and touches down wherever he touches down in the United States. But this was a positive development.
Yes, physically, emotionally, Pastor Brunson is in a much better place than a Turkish prison, as anyone can imagine. I mean, that's just a logical conclusion right there.
Harry, as we look, and I'm going to go really quick, Harry, and if I can get Dan in here. Harry, what do you think the critical thing to happen here is? I mean, obviously the release. What do you think the trigger point is? Is it the threat of sanctions?
Well, I think it's the threat of sanctions, but it's also the threat that comes from the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act.
I was going to ask that to you, Dan. You feel the same way?
Yeah, it's a consistent message from the United States, the Congress backing up the word of the president, who is the one that can actually implement these sanctions, Jay. That consistent message has come. That's what we were asking for, and it's now been delivered.
Bipartisan support for this. That's why you have Jeanne Shaheen, you have Lindsey Graham, you've got the President of the United States. So you've got the U.S. government in lockstep together, which how many times can you say that? On how many issues can you say that where Republicans and Democrats are in total lockstep from the far left to the far right and everyone in between? And then, of course, the executive branch as well.
Yep. Americans are being held captive. We want them home. That's what we do as Americans. That's Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green Party, whatever you are. Well, that does it for the broadcast today. Let me encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ. You can do that at aclj.org. We're in a matching challenge campaign. So we're talking about Andrew Brunson's case. aclj.org. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for it. It's aclj.org. Or you can call in your pledge at 1-877-989-2255. That's 877-989-2255 or aclj.org. Pray for Andrew Brunson, that he was returned to the United States from home captivity in Turkey. We'll talk to you next week.
It is a critical time for our nation, and the American Center for Law and Justice is on the front lines, defending life and liberty, engaging the issues that matter most to you and your family. Whether it's working to protect Americans from the dangers of radical Islam and the persecution of Christians, to defending life at the U.S. Supreme Court, to protecting your religious and constitutional freedoms, we could not do this work without you, without your support. And now your support can really make a tremendous difference. For a limited time, you can participate in the ACLJ Matching Challenge. If you make a gift now, it will be doubled. $25 becomes $50. A $100 gift becomes $200. Please stand with the ACLJ right now and call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or go online at aclj.org. Thank you for your support.